A silent witness. Sergeant Daniel Hayes stood at the edge of the Taco Bell counter, his silhouette shadowed against the dim, fluorescent light. To any casual observer, he looked like a typical patron, perhaps a bit older, a bit wearier, but still one with the small group of late-night customers who sought the comfort of a hot meal after a long day. But Daniel was far from a typical patron. With broad shoulders honed from years in the military and a steely gaze that betrayed a lifetime of battles, he exuded a calm authority. A veteran of 3 deployments, he had endured the intensity of the battlefield, the loss of comrades, and the constant edge between survival and tragedy. He was home now, on leave, trying to adjust to the stillness of civilian life. Even so, the ghosts of the past lingered in his mind. Faces of those who hadn't made it, sounds of distant explosions, and the jarring quiet of empty streets back home that now felt foreign. His sanctuary had become small, predictable rituals that gave him a sense of normalcy. Early morning runs through his neighborhood, the familiarity of his dog, a spirited German shepherd named Bear, and an occasional indulgence at Taco Bell, where he could find comfort in the simplicity of a taco and the warmth of a familiar setting. But tonight, as he stood alone in line, his peace was unexpectedly disrupted. Behind him, a hushed conversation between 2 young boys broke through his thoughts. Their voices were low, filled with a mix of excitement and an unmistakable edge of fear. "Are you sure we can pull this off?" whispered the taller boy, his voice shaky but attempting to sound confident. "Yeah, we just gotta be quick," the other boy responded, his tone equally uncertain. "We won't even need much, just enough to make it through the night." Their words were hesitant, carrying a hint of desperation that struck a chord with Daniel. He turned his head slightly, trying to catch more of their conversation without making it obvious. His training had honed his senses to pick up on tension, to recognize fear. He'd spent enough time in war zones to know when someone was putting on a brave face to mask deeper worry. The taller boy's voice quivered. "But what if someone catches us? What if the police show up? Mom would be. She'd be so disappointed." Daniel's heart sank as he realized the boys were debating whether to risk something desperate, something born from a need too profound for children their age to carry. As the conversation continued, fragments of their story became clearer. The 2 boys, barely teenagers, were brothers, struggling with poverty and unsure of where their next meal would come from. Daniel listened, a swell of empathy growing within him. Their words transported him back to his own youth, to a time when he'd felt the same helplessness and need to step up for his family. He remembered a winter night when his father had fallen ill, and the bills had piled high while his mother worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. He knew too well what it meant to shoulder burdens far too heavy for young shoulders. In a spontaneous moment of compassion, Daniel took a step back, turning to face the boys. "Excuse me, gentlemen," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "I couldn't help but overhear. Sounds like you're having a rough time." The boys' eyes widened, and they immediately looked down, startled and embarrassed. Daniel kept his stance relaxed, hands open to show he meant no harm. "Look," he continued gently, "I don't mean to pry, but I've been in tough spots myself, and maybe I can help you out." He gestured toward the menu, offering them a small but genuine smile. "Why don't you 2 pick out whatever you want to eat, and it's on me tonight. Just a little something to help." The boys exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from fear to hesitant gratitude. Slowly, as if they were afraid the offer would vanish if they moved too quickly, they stepped up and placed their orders. Each item they selected a testament to how rare such a luxury was for them. As the cashier rang up the total, Daniel noticed the boys' nervous glances, the way they hunched as if trying to make themselves smaller. He offered a reassuring nod, and then leaned down to speak to them as they waited for their order. "What are your names?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. "I'm Brandon," said the taller one, his voice barely above a whisper. He pointed to his younger brother. "This is Leo." "Nice to meet you both," Daniel replied warmly. "I'm Daniel. You 2 live around here?" Brandon nodded. Yeah, with our mom. She's working tonight, and, well, things have been kind of hard lately. Daniel sensed the vulnerability in their words, the unspoken details of their struggle. He chose his next words carefully. Sometimes, life throws things at us that feel impossible to handle, but it doesn't mean you have to go it alone. Sometimes, people just need a little help. He paused. I grew up in a tough spot too, and a little kindness made a world of difference to me. Leo's eyes sparkled with curiosity. You did? He asked, his voice soft yet laced with the eager wonder of a child yearning for hope. Daniel nodded. Yeah. It taught me something important, that there's strength in reaching out, in having someone there. Doesn't make you weak, it just means you're human. Brandon nodded, his face brightening with understanding. Thanks, Mr. Daniel. We didn't think anyone cared. As their food arrived, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. If you two don't mind, I'd be happy to give you a ride home once you're done. It's late, and I'd rather know you got there safe. The boys, taken aback by his kindness, hesitated for a moment before nodding gratefully. They ate with gusto, savoring every bite, and soon Daniel found himself driving them through the quiet streets of their small town. Their destination turned out to be a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, worn and tired, much like the boys themselves. As he pulled up, he noticed the faded paint, the cracked windows, and the dimly lit pathway leading to their front door. It was a sight he recognized too well, the quiet dignity of a family trying to make ends meet in a world that often seemed stacked against them. Before the boys stepped out of the car, Daniel took a deep breath, thinking about the right words to say. Listen, if there's ever anything you need, anything I can help with, don't hesitate to reach out. You two are stronger than you know, but sometimes strength means letting someone lend a hand. Brandon and Leo nodded, their eyes wide with gratitude and a newfound sense of hope. They thanked him again, their voices trembling with appreciation. As he watched them walk toward the door, Daniel felt a shift within himself. He'd spent years focused on survival, on carrying the weight of loss and battle. But tonight, in the stillness of the street, he realized that perhaps his purpose had shifted, that maybe, just maybe, his experiences could serve others in ways he hadn't yet imagined. With that, he pulled away, his heart lighter than it had been in years, carrying with him the knowledge that he'd just taken the first step in a journey that would soon reshape not only the lives of those boys, but his own as well. Seeds of hope. As the days passed, Daniel couldn't shake the memory of the two boys he'd met at Taco Bell. Brandon and Leo had touched something deep within him, rekindling the compassion he had once put aside to survive the rigors of war. Their vulnerability and quiet dignity reminded him of his own past, and he found himself returning to that night again and again, wondering how he might do more to help. The very next evening, he drove by their neighborhood. He hadn't planned to stop, but found himself slowing as he approached their apartment complex. The place looked even more worn down in the daylight. Paint chipped off the walls, and the window sills sagged as if weighed down by time and neglect. He saw children playing in the parking lot, their laughter echoing through the quiet streets, and he realized how long it had been since he'd heard such simple joy. At that moment, Brandon and Leo appeared, their faces lighting up as they recognized him. They exchanged surprised glances, then waved shyly, as though unsure whether he'd remember them. He rolled down his window, offering a smile. "Hey, you two," he called. "Out enjoying the sun?" Brandon nodded, his gaze flicking from Daniel to his younger brother, who looked at him as if seeking permission to speak. "Mr. Daniel." Leo's voice was filled with excitement. "What are you doing here?" Daniel chuckled, stepping out of his car. "Just in the neighborhood," he said casually, though they both sensed he was there for more than a chance encounter. "Thought I'd swing by, see how you two were doing." The boys exchanged glances, their faces a mix of surprise and gratitude. They looked tired, their clothes slightly worn, and Daniel noticed Brandon's shoes, barely held together by fraying laces and threads. Daniel's heart tightened as he imagined the challenges they must face daily. "Do you want to sit for a bit?" Daniel offered, gesturing toward a shaded bench nearby. The boys nodded eagerly, as though starved for company and a listening ear. As they settled on the bench, Daniel asked them about school, their interests, and how they were adjusting to life since their dad had left. Bit by bit, they opened up, their voices growing more confident, their expressions less guarded. Brandon, always the protective older brother, seemed to choose his words carefully, often glancing at Leo before answering. "I try to help Mom as much as I can," Brandon said, his voice a mix of pride and strain. "She works a lot, so I look after Leo, make sure he does his homework and stuff. And he's the best cook," Leo piped in with admiration, grinning. "He even knows how to make spaghetti." Daniel chuckled. "Sounds like you two have got things figured out pretty well. But don't forget, it's okay to lean on others sometimes too." Brandon looked down, kicking at the gravel beneath his feet. "It's just hard, you know. I don't want to let Mom down. She does everything for us. And sometimes I feel like I should be doing more." Daniel nodded, recognizing that familiar sense of responsibility that had once defined his own childhood. He thought about his younger years, about feeling too young to shoulder the burdens that life demanded, but too proud to ask for help. He decided, then and there, to find a way to ease their load. "Hey, how would you two like to come over sometime?" he asked. "We could have a movie night, maybe order some pizza. I have a dog too. You'd love him. His name's Bear, and he's got more energy than I can handle." Leo's face lit up with a mix of excitement and hesitation. "Really? We wouldn't be too much trouble." "Trouble?" Daniel laughed. "You're the last thing from it. I'd be happy to have you over." Brandon seemed hesitant, protective of his younger brother, but the kindness in Daniel's eyes eased his doubts. "That would be amazing, Mr. Daniel," he said quietly, his voice tinged with wonder. The three of them parted with plans for the following Saturday evening, and as Daniel drove home, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Saturday night arrived, and Daniel prepared as though he were hosting old friends. He vacuumed, set out snacks, and even gave Bear a bath, though the dog had promptly rolled in the grass afterward, much to Daniel's chagrin. The house felt alive with anticipation, and as he heard a knock on the door, Bear rushed forward, barking excitedly. Daniel opened the door to see Brandon and Leo standing there, their eyes wide with awe. The boys had dressed in their best, which for them meant clean but visibly worn clothing. Yet the joy on their faces made them appear as if they were dressed in their finest. "Come on in, boys." Daniel welcomed them warmly, moving Bear back to give them space. Bear wagged his tail furiously, immediately taking to the newcomers with enthusiasm. "Whoa, he's huge," Leo exclaimed, bending down to pet Bear, who licked his face enthusiastically. "He's a gentle giant," Daniel laughed, "though sometimes I think he forgets his own size." As the boys settled in, Daniel handed each of them a can of soda, and they made their way to the living room. He'd set up blankets and pillows on the floor, creating a cozy nest for movie watching. The boys took in every detail with awe, and Daniel's heart swelled as he saw the joy on their faces. "What are we watching?" Brandon asked, his eyes shining with anticipation. "Anything you want," Daniel replied. "The remote's all yours." The boys deliberated for a moment, then settled on an animated classic. As the movie played, Daniel found himself not so much watching the screen as he did the boys, noting their laughter, their enthusiasm, and the easy way they relaxed in his home. It was as though, for a brief moment, they had forgotten their hardships. Halfway through the movie, Bear plopped himself beside Leo, nudging his head into his lap. Leo beamed, stroking Bear's fur with a gentleness that revealed just how much he'd been longing for such simple companionship. Even Brandon, who had been cautious initially, began to unwind, his posture relaxing as he enjoyed the comfort of the evening. Later, They gathered around the dining table for pizza. As they ate, the conversation shifted to dreams and ambitions. "What do you guys want to be when you grow up?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious. Leo, who was usually quiet, answered first, his eyes bright with excitement. "I want to be a firefighter. They're so brave, and they get to save people." Daniel smiled, impressed by his bold choice. "That's a great goal, Leo. You've already got the heart for it." Brandon, quieter, looked down as he considered the question. I think I'd want to be a teacher, someone who helps kids who don't have much. I don't know if that's possible, though." "Why wouldn't it be?" Daniel asked gently. Brandon shrugged, a hint of resignation in his expression. "We just don't have a lot, and college costs a lot of money. I don't know if it's something I can actually do." Daniel's heart ached for him. He saw in Brandon a spark, a desire to help others, that should never be dimmed by circumstance. "Brandon, you've got everything it takes to make that dream happen. Trust me. The path might be tough, but there's always a way." The boys nodded, each holding onto Daniel's words as though they were a lifeline, and for the rest of the evening they laughed, talked, and shared dreams freely, a family of sorts forming in that small, humble living room. As the night drew to a close, Daniel drove the boys back home. In the glow of the streetlights, he noticed their small hands tucked into their jackets, the way they leaned on each other for warmth. The sight solidified his resolve. When they reached the apartment, Brandon turned to him. "Thank you, Mr. Daniel. This was the best night we've had in a long time." "It was my pleasure," Daniel replied, his voice warm and sincere. "And remember, you two are welcome anytime. My door's always open." As he watched them disappear into their building, Daniel knew he couldn't simply walk away from their lives. They had filled a part of him that had long been hollowed out by years of isolation and loss. They had, in their own quiet way, given him a purpose that transcended himself. As he drove home, he began to form a plan, a way to truly make a difference for these boys and their family. He realized that the chance encounter at Taco Bell had been more than a coincidence. It had been a call, a reminder that life, even amid its hardships, held moments of connection that could change everything. And from that night onward, Daniel would find himself on a path that would not only transform the lives of Brandon, Leo, and their mother, but would also renew his own in ways he hadn't dared to imagine. A light in the darkness. The following week, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about Brandon, Leo, and their mother. He knew their situation was tenuous at best, and he felt the weight of their struggles pressing on his heart. But he also knew that helping them would require more than just occasional meals or moments of kindness. It would take something bigger, a genuine effort to understand their needs and find a way to lift them out of the difficult circumstances they faced daily. Determined, Daniel decided to start small. He called in a favor with a friend who worked at the local community center, a place he remembered from his own youth. Back then, the center had provided a refuge during hard times, offering everything from free tutoring to meals and job training for families in need. He set up a meeting to learn more about what resources were available for families like Brandon and Leo's. "Daniel, it's great to hear from you," said Linda, the director of the center, when they met that afternoon. "You know, we're always looking for volunteers. I'd be thrilled if you wanted to help out." Daniel smiled, but his mind was focused on the two boys. "I'd love to lend a hand, Linda, but there's actually a family I was hoping you could help me with. A single mother with 2 young boys. They're struggling, and I think they'd really benefit from some of the services you offer." Linda's eyes softened with understanding. "Absolutely. We have several programs for single-parent families. There's financial counseling, job placement services, even after-school programs for the kids." They spent the next hour reviewing options, and Daniel left with a plan. He decided to approach the family carefully, not wanting to impose, but he hoped they'd be willing to accept the help. That evening, he drove to their apartment, this time with a grocery bag in hand filled with fresh produce, canned goods, and a few treats for the boys. He had also brought along a card for the community center with Linda's contact information. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on their door, hoping they wouldn't feel burdened by his offer. A moment later, the door creaked open, and Brandon's mother appeared. She looked exhausted, with shadows under her eyes and worry lines etched deeply into her face. But she managed a polite smile, surprised yet grateful at seeing him. "Hi, Mrs. Clark," Daniel said, extending a warm hand. "I'm Daniel. I met your boys last week, and they're really wonderful kids. I wanted to bring a few things by and see if there's anything I can help with." Her smile was weary but genuine. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I don't know what to say. Brandon and Leo have been talking about you nonstop. They said you were so kind, and I can't thank you enough for showing them such kindness." "It's nothing, really," Daniel replied, stepping inside as she motioned for him to come in. "I just wanted to see if maybe there's anything else I can do for you all. I know things can get tough, and there's a local community center that offers resources for families." She glanced down, clearly hesitant, her pride fighting with her need for help. "It's just been hard since, well, their father left a few years ago. I've been working double shifts, but with rent and everything else, it's tough to stay afloat." Daniel nodded, sensing her discomfort. "I understand. Sometimes we just need a little support to get through the rough spots. The community center has great programs. They can help with job placement, after-school care for the boys, and even financial planning." She looked at the card he handed her, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Daniel. Really, I've always tried to manage on my own, but I don't want my pride to get in the way of what's best for my boys." "You're doing an amazing job," Daniel reassured her. "It takes a lot of strength to do what you're doing. And there's nothing wrong with accepting a little help." As he spoke, Brandon and Leo emerged from their room, eyes lighting up when they saw him. They grinned, both boys clearly thrilled to see their new friend. "Mr. Daniel," Leo cried, rushing forward, "are you staying for dinner?" Daniel laughed, glancing at Mrs. Clark, who offered a welcoming nod. "Sure, I'd love to stay if it's all right with your mom." As they prepared dinner together, Mrs. Clark opened up bit by bit, sharing more about her struggles and hopes for her children. She worked as a cleaner at a local hospital, a job that paid little but kept her on her feet. She'd been trying to save up to move into a safer neighborhood, but every setback seemed to eat away at her progress. Daniel listened attentively, his respect for her growing with every word. He could see where Brandon and Leo had inherited their resilience. After dinner, Daniel helped clean up, feeling more and more like part of their small family. Before he left, he gave the boys an encouraging smile and promised to visit again soon. The next few weeks were filled with small, intentional steps. Daniel checked in regularly, bringing groceries and occasionally taking the boys out for an afternoon at the park with Bear. They laughed, played, and talked about everything under the sun: school, their dreams, and even Daniel's time in the Army, which fascinated them both. One afternoon, while walking along the river with the boys, Brandon asked him a question that took Daniel by surprise. "Mr. Daniel," he began, a thoughtful look on his face, "why are you doing all this? You don't even know us." Daniel paused, caught off guard by the directness of the question. He crouched down to meet Brandon's gaze, choosing his words carefully. "Because sometimes life brings people together for a reason," he said quietly. "When I met you and Leo, I saw a part of myself in you too, and I realized that maybe I could make things a little easier for you, just like someone did for me once." Brandon seemed to consider this, nodding slowly. "I hope that someday I can help someone like you're helping us." "You will," Daniel assured him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're already strong, and you care about others. That's a rare gift, Brandon. Don't ever lose that." As they continued their walk, Daniel felt a surge of pride for both boys. He could see the kindness and strength they possessed despite the hardships they endured, and he was determined to help them reach their potential. Meanwhile, Mrs. Clark had begun meeting with Linda at the community center. The staff there quickly took to her, admiring her determination and work ethic. Linda introduced her to a program that helped parents find better-paying jobs through training and certification. Mrs. Clark signed up, realizing that she could improve her chances of a stable income for her family. One day, Daniel received a phone call from Linda, her voice excited and full of good news. "Daniel, I just wanted to let you know that Mrs. Clark completed her training, and she's been offered a position with benefits at a local office. It's an administrative job that pays well, and they're even flexible with hours so she can be there for her boys." The news filled Daniel with joy. He knew how much this meant for her and the boys. That evening, he stopped by their apartment, bearing a small cake and balloons to celebrate. When Mrs. Clark opened the door and saw Daniel standing there with his surprise, her eyes welled up with tears. "Daniel, you've done so much for us. I don't even have the words to thank you." "It's all you," he replied with a gentle smile. "You worked hard for this. I'm just glad I could help you get there." As they gathered in their small living room to celebrate, the atmosphere was filled with hope and joy, a stark contrast to the sense of struggle that had permeated the space before. The boys cheered as their mother cut the cake, and Daniel found himself watching with pride as Mrs. Clark smiled for the first time in what seemed like years, her face radiant with hope for the future. After the celebration, Mrs. Clark pulled Daniel aside. "You didn't just help us with food or money, Daniel. You gave us our dignity back. You made us feel seen. For the first time in years, I feel like there's hope." Daniel felt a lump in his throat as he heard her words. Helping this family had rekindled his own purpose, filling a void that he hadn't known how to address since his return from the military. He realized that his connection with the Clarks was far deeper than he had anticipated. It was healing, not only for them, but for him as well. In the weeks that followed, the Clark family settled into a new rhythm. With Mrs. Clark's improved financial situation, she was able to afford better accommodations, and soon they moved into a small but safe two-bedroom apartment closer to the community center and the boys' school. The apartment was modest, but it was clean, bright, and most importantly, a place where they could feel safe. The boys blossomed in their new home. Their grades improved, and they both grew more confident, thriving in the stability they had long craved. Brandon joined an after-school tutoring program to help younger kids with their homework, and Leo began showing interest in sports, joining the local youth soccer team. They became known at the community center, where Daniel continued to volunteer, often mentoring boys like them who needed guidance and encouragement. For Daniel, the experience transformed him in ways he hadn't imagined. Through helping the Clark family, he found a renewed sense of purpose, and his own wounds from the past began to heal. His nights became quieter, his nightmares fewer, replaced with memories of laughter, soccer games, and quiet afternoons spent with a family he had come to care for deeply. And in those moments, Daniel realized that the connection he had forged with this family, the hope he had helped ignite in their lives, was perhaps the most meaningful mission he had ever undertaken, a network of kindness. With the Clark family on a more stable footing, Daniel could have stepped back, but something kept him close to them, an unspoken bond and a sense of purpose that pulled him back into their lives, again and again. Over the months, he continued spending time with Brandon and Leo, taking them on weekend outings, helping them with their studies, and introducing them to new experiences that would expand their horizons. He could see them blossoming, their personalities unfolding like spring flowers after a long, harsh winter. Brandon grew more confident, a quiet but strong leader, while Leo's once timid nature was now filled with laughter and curiosity. As Daniel became a familiar presence in the Clark family's lives, others in the community began to notice. Neighbors, teachers, and parents in the boys' school were touched by the story of a soldier who had stepped in to help a struggling family. The ripple effect of his kindness spread throughout the town, inspiring others to offer their own acts of generosity and support. One Saturday morning, Daniel was volunteering at the community center when Linda approached him, her face glowing with excitement. "Daniel, "I wanted to tell you something," she began, unable to hide her grin. "Your work with the Clarks has inspired so many people. We've had more volunteers sign up in the past month than we have in an entire year. Parents, veterans, teachers, people want to help. You've started something here." Daniel was taken aback, humbled by the news. "I didn't set out to do anything special," he said, scratching his head, feeling a bit sheepish. "I just wanted to help one family." Linda nodded. "And that's the thing about kindness. It's contagious. You've shown people what a difference one person can make. Now, everyone wants to pitch in." The town of Willow Creek was small but tightly knit, and with Daniel's story spreading, residents began rallying around families in need. Local businesses organized donation drives, food banks received an influx of support, and several shelters for single parents and homeless families were established. The community center, once a quiet place with limited resources, transformed into a vibrant hub of activity and support, a place where anyone in need could find a listening ear, a warm meal, or a helping hand. The initiative even caught the attention of the local newspaper, the Willow Creek Gazette, which ran a front-page story titled, "The Heart of a Soldier: How One Man's Kindness is Changing Willow Creek." The story painted a vivid picture of Daniel's journey, his service in the military, and his dedication to helping those in his community. For Daniel, it was strange to see his name in print, to have his actions recognized so publicly. He had never sought attention for his efforts. He simply couldn't ignore the need he saw in Brandon, Leo, and their mother. Yet, the story served as a rallying cry, urging others to consider how they too could make a difference. One evening, as Daniel sat with Mrs. Clark in the community center lounge, she expressed her gratitude once more. "I don't think we could ever repay you, Daniel. What you've done for us, it's beyond words." Daniel shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Clark. I just wanted to be there when you needed someone. And now, you've got a whole community standing beside you." She looked down, emotion evident in her gaze. "You gave us more than help, Daniel. You gave us hope, and not just us. You've given hope to so many others, too." Their conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock. Daniel looked up to see a group of people at the door, a family of 4, a single father with his young daughter, and 2 elderly women, all with hopeful expressions. Linda quickly stepped over to introduce them. "These are some of the families we're helping now, thanks to the new support," she explained. "They've heard about you, Daniel, and wanted to meet the man who started all this." Daniel was humbled, almost embarrassed by the attention, but he welcomed each of them warmly. They spoke briefly, sharing stories and offering words of gratitude that left him speechless. He learned about their struggles, the small victories they celebrated, and the dreams they held close to their hearts. As he listened, Daniel realized that the journey he had started with the Clarks had grown into something much bigger. He was no longer just a soldier adjusting to civilian life. He was now a mentor, an advocate, and a friend to many. The following week, Daniel decided to organize a community event at the center, a day of giving, where families could gather to receive donated clothing, food, and school supplies. The event also featured job placement services, financial counseling, and after-school program sign-ups. With Linda's support, he reached out to local businesses, securing sponsors for the event, and soon the day had turned into a much-anticipated gathering for the entire town. On the morning of the event, Daniel arrived early, helping to set up tables, organize supplies, and direct the volunteers who had come to help. The Clarks were among the first to arrive, with Mrs. Clark volunteering to greet families at the entrance and help them find the resources they needed. Brandon and Leo joined Daniel in handing out supplies to the children, each of them proudly sporting a volunteer badge. As families streamed in, a local musician began playing, and soon the community center was filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of connection. Parents picked out winter coats for their children, teens signed up for tutoring programs, and single parents received assistance with job applications. Each corner of the center buzzed with life, every face aglow with gratitude and hope. Around noon, Daniel spotted a familiar face in the crowd. It was Mr. Rivera, his former commanding officer, who had retired a year before Daniel himself had returned home. Mr. Rivera walked over, his steps slow and purposeful, his expression a mixture of pride and respect. "Sergeant Hayes," he said, extending his hand, "I heard about what you've been doing. I had to come see it for myself." Daniel shook his hand, surprised and a little flustered. "Mr. Rivera, it's good to see you. I didn't think anyone from the old days would show up here." Rivera chuckled. "You've done something incredible, Hayes. This is a different kind of battlefield, but you're still fighting. For hope, for change. That takes courage." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I guess I just found a new mission, sir. One that means just as much to me as anything I did in the service." Rivera clapped him on the shoulder. "It's inspiring, Hayes, and I'm not the only one who thinks so." At that moment, Daniel noticed a group of veterans gathering at the edge of the room, men and women he recognized from his time in the military. They had all come to support him, each of them ready to lend a hand. Seeing them standing together, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and camaraderie. He realized that, in creating this network of kindness, he had found a way to reconnect with those he had fought beside, to build a bridge between his past and his present. The veterans joined the event as mentors, guiding families through job placement services, assisting with resume writing, and offering encouragement to parents and children alike. They shared their stories of resilience, of finding purpose after service, and helped to remind others that no one was truly alone. As the afternoon waned, Daniel found himself surrounded by the Clark family, Mr. Rivera, and a dozen new friends who had become a part of this journey. Linda approached, a tearful smile on her face. "Daniel," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "today was nothing short of magic. We helped hundreds of people. This town has changed because of you." He looked around, humbled, grateful, and overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "It's not just me, Linda. It's everyone here. All of us. We're part of this." As the event wrapped up, families left with bags of groceries, children clutched stuffed animals, and parents walked away with renewed confidence and the belief that their community truly cared. Daniel watched them go, his heart full as he thought of the lives they'd touched that day. After the crowd had dispersed, Daniel gathered with the volunteers to clean up. Brandon and Leo stayed by his side, helping to stack chairs and clear tables, their eyes shining with pride at having played a part in the day's success. As they finished, Brandon tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Mr. Daniel," he said, his voice filled with admiration, "today, it felt like we were making a difference." Daniel crouched down to meet his gaze. "You did make a difference, Brandon. Both of you did, and if you keep this up, there's no limit to the impact you'll have on others." Leo hugged him suddenly, his small arms wrapped tightly around Daniel's neck. "Thank you, Mr. Daniel, for everything." Daniel hugged him back, his heart brimming with emotion. As he pulled back, he looked into Leo's eyes, seeing the new light there, a spark of hope and resilience that he knew would carry him forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. That night, as Daniel walked back to his car, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had found his place, his purpose, and his family. In the faces of those he had helped, he saw his own struggles reflected, but he also saw strength, love, and the power of human connection. In helping the Clarks, in inspiring his community, Daniel had not only transformed the lives of others, he had also rediscovered his own humanity. The journey had healed him in ways he hadn't thought possible, filling the void left by war with love, compassion, and a legacy of kindness that would continue to grow long after the eventful day at the community center. As he drove home under the stars, Daniel realized that he had finally come home. And this home, woven together by shared stories, enduring hope, and acts of selfless kindness, was one he would cherish for the rest of his life. The heart of a mentor. Daniel's life had shifted from quiet solitude to a whirlwind of purpose. The community had rallied around him, and he had embraced his role not just as a helper, but as a guide, a mentor, and a pillar of hope. His relationship with the Clarks grew deeper. Mrs. Clark, now working a stable job, became a friend and confidant, and Brandon and Leo came to see Daniel as the father figure they had been missing. Daniel felt a responsibility to teach them not only practical skills, but also the values that he believed would serve them well in life: kindness, resilience, and the courage to stand up for others. Yet even as he settled into this new chapter, Daniel knew that life was not without its challenges. Brandon and Leo, despite their progress, still had scars from years of instability and hardship. He could see it in the way Brandon would sometimes look out the window, lost in thought, or in the way Leo would freeze up whenever they encountered a situation he couldn't control. It reminded Daniel of his own struggles returning from the battlefield. Healing, he knew, wasn't a quick process. One evening, as he was walking the boys home from a community soccer game, Brandon suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Daniel," he began hesitantly, do you think it's okay to feel angry?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He looked at Brandon, noticing the way the boy's face had hardened, a storm brewing behind his usually calm demeanor. Daniel knew that look too well. It was the look of someone who had been carrying a burden far too heavy for far too long. "Yeah, Brandon," Daniel replied softly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel anything. What matters is what you do with those feelings." Brandon looked away, his shoulders slumping. "Sometimes I feel like it's not fair, you know. My mom works so hard, and Leo and I try our best, but it still feels like we're always struggling. Like no matter what we do, things will never really change." Daniel took a deep breath, understanding that Brandon's words were echoes of his own thoughts from years ago. He stopped walking, crouched down, and looked Brandon in the eye. "Life isn't always fair," he said gently. "Sometimes it throws things at you that you didn't ask for and don't deserve. But you have a choice in how you respond. You can let that anger build up and weigh you down, or you can use it to fuel something better." Brandon looked at him, uncertainty in his eyes. How do you make that choice?" Daniel thought for a moment, searching for the right words. "I used to think I had to be tough all the time, that showing any other side of myself was weak. But then I realized that strength isn't about hiding your feelings. It's about facing them, working through them, and finding ways to use what you've been through to help others." Brandon nodded slowly, absorbing Daniel's words. Leo, who had been listening quietly, stepped closer, his small hand reaching for Daniel's. "Mr. Daniel, you don't seem like someone who would get angry," Leo said softly, his eyes wide with admiration. "You're always so calm." Daniel chuckled, though there was a hint of sadness in his smile. "I felt angry more times than I can count, Leo. But I learned that I don't have to fight that feeling alone. I found people who helped me work through it, who reminded me that I didn't have to carry everything by myself. That's what I want you both to remember. You're not alone. Not anymore." As they continued their walk, Daniel shared more about his experiences, about the friends he'd lost, the struggles he'd faced when he first returned home, and the journey he had taken to rebuild his life. He wanted the boys to understand that while pain was inevitable, it didn't define them. They could shape their own paths, no matter how tough things got. By the time they reached the Clarks' apartment, Brandon's expression had softened, the weight in his eyes lighter. He hugged Daniel tightly before going inside. A quiet "thank you" whispered against his shoulder. For Daniel, that small gesture spoke volumes. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could lift a burden that felt insurmountable. As the weeks went by, Daniel became more involved in mentoring not just Brandon and Leo, but other kids from the community center as well. He started a weekly program called The Next Step, where he taught life skills, self-defense, and even practical survival tips he had learned in the military. The classes became popular, attracting not only kids but also teenagers and young adults from the area who were eager for guidance. One of the regular attendees was a boy named Jalen, a 15-year-old who had been struggling with anger issues and poor academic performance. Jalen had a rough exterior, often getting into fights and brushing off authority figures. Daniel recognized himself in Jalen. The same anger, the same frustration at feeling trapped by circumstances. And so he began spending extra time with him, offering him a steady presence and someone who believed in his potential. Jalen was skeptical at first, mistrusting Daniel's intentions, but gradually the walls he had built around himself began to crumble. During one session, Daniel challenged Jalen to think about his future, asking him what he wanted to achieve beyond the struggles he faced now. "Man, I don't know," Jalen muttered, crossing his arms defensively. "People like me don't get far. We just try to survive." "That's where you're wrong, Jalen," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "You're not defined by where you come from or what people think of you. You have the power to change your life, to build something that's yours. But you have to believe it first." Jalen's gaze softened, and for the first time, Daniel saw a spark of hope in his eyes. It was a small breakthrough, but it was enough. Over the next few months, Jalen began to apply himself, not only in Daniel's sessions but also in school, raising his grades and finding an outlet for his anger through martial arts, which Daniel taught him. Through mentoring Jalen and the other kids, Daniel began to understand the true impact of his actions. He was not just offering guidance, he was helping to instill a sense of purpose in these young lives. He was giving them tools to navigate life's challenges, to find their strength, and to envision a future beyond survival. Around this time, Daniel received a call from a local high school counselor, Ms. Holloway, who had heard about his work at the community center. She invited him to speak at an upcoming assembly on resilience and mental health. Public speaking wasn't something Daniel was comfortable with. He'd spent most of his life in action, not words. But he knew this was an opportunity to reach even more young people, to share the lessons he'd learned through his own hardships. The day of the assembly arrived, and Daniel stood on the stage, looking out at the sea of faces. He took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice steady. "I'm here today not because I have all the answers, but because I know what it feels like to struggle, to feel lost, and to wonder if things will ever get better. I served in the military, and when I came back, I thought I could handle anything. But life, it has a way of humbling us, of teaching us things we didn't know we needed to learn." He paused, scanning the audience. Some students listened intently, while others looked distracted, their faces etched with boredom or defiance. But Daniel pressed on, knowing that if he could reach even one of them, his words would be worth it. "I've learned that strength isn't about facing everything alone. It's about knowing when to ask for help, when to lean on others, and when to let people in. Sometimes, life is hard. Sometimes, you'll feel angry, sad, or defeated. But those feelings, they're not the end. They're just part of the journey." By the end of his speech, there was a silence in the auditorium, a stillness that spoke of connection. A few students clapped, and gradually, the applause grew, filling the room. As he stepped off the stage, several students approached him, thanking him and sharing their own stories. Ms. Holloway beamed with pride, knowing that Daniel's words had made an impact. One evening after another session at the community center, Daniel found Brandon waiting for him, a question clear in his eyes. "Mr. Daniel," he began, "do you think maybe one day I could do what you're doing, help people the way you do?" Daniel's heart swelled with pride. "Brandon, you already are. Every time you look out for your brother, every time you lend a hand to someone who needs it, you're making a difference. And one day, if that's what you want, you'll have even more chances to help others." Brandon smiled, his face lighting up with hope. "I think I'd like that." Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of his own journey, his own struggles, and the purpose he had found in helping these kids. They were the next generation, and he was honored to be a part of their lives, guiding them, nurturing them, and showing them the path to a brighter future. As he walked back to his car that night, he felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He had become more than a mentor. He had become a part of something bigger, a network of kindness and resilience that would continue to grow long after he was gone. This journey, he knew, was far from over. The seeds he had planted were taking root, and they would bloom in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Each act of kindness, each lesson taught, rippling outward in a wave of hope and healing. The legacy of compassion. Years had passed since that fateful night at Taco Bell, when Daniel had overheard two young boys and their whispered words of desperation. The journey that followed had transformed not only Brandon, Leo, and their mother, but also Daniel himself and an entire community. What had begun as a single act of kindness had woven into a tapestry of lives touched, dreams ignited, and hope reborn. As Daniel stood in the heart of Willow Creek on an early autumn afternoon, he looked around at the vibrant community center, now named the Willow Creek Outreach Center, bustling with activity. A crowd had gathered for the annual Hope and Resilience Day, a celebration that had become a cherished tradition. Families mingled, children played, and teens, many of whom Daniel had mentored over the years, organized games and activities. The event had grown far beyond Daniel's initial vision, evolving into a day when the town celebrated compassion, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds that held them all together. This year was special. The community center, once a modest gathering place, had been renovated and expanded through donations, volunteer efforts, and the support of local businesses. Today, they were dedicating the new facility, a state-of-the-art building with classrooms, a library, and a recreational space for after-school programs. The event had drawn people from all around the county, each of them there to celebrate what Daniel had come to call a chain reaction of kindness. The day began with speeches and heartfelt words of gratitude. The mayor of Willow Creek, a once skeptical politician who had seen the town transformed by the efforts of Daniel and the community, stepped up to the podium. "Today, we honor not just a building or a center," she said, her voice filled with pride, "but a movement that started with one man's belief in the power of compassion. Daniel Hayes has shown us that change doesn't require grand gestures. It starts with a simple decision to care, to reach out, and to believe in others." The crowd erupted in applause, and Daniel felt his heart swell with humility. He looked out at the sea of faces, many of whom had become like family to him. He saw Jalen, now a college student studying social work, his face beaming with pride. Brandon, who had recently graduated high school with honors, stood beside him, tall and confident, a young man who had found his path despite the obstacles. Leo, now in high school and the star of his soccer team, waved excitedly when he caught Daniel's eye. Mrs. Clark, standing near the front, wiped a tear from her eye. She had not only stabilized her life financially, but had become a mentor herself, volunteering at the center and leading a program for single mothers, helping them navigate the challenges she had once faced. Daniel saw in her a strength that moved him deeply, a reminder of how far she had come and how far she had yet to go, her life forever changed by the chance connection they'd forged. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel approached the podium with a mixture of nerves and gratitude. He looked at the crowd, his heart racing, but he felt a quiet strength settle over him, a peace he hadn't felt in years. This was his family, his community, and his story. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "When I came back from the military, I struggled. I carried a weight that I didn't know how to put down, a sense of isolation that I thought would follow me forever. But then I met two boys, two remarkable boys who showed me that sometimes the things that break us can also bring us together." He glanced at Brandon and Leo, who were listening intently, their eyes shining with pride and love. "Those boys taught me that hope is a choice we make every day. That by lifting each other up, by choosing kindness, we can build something greater than ourselves." Daniel continued, his voice resonating with gratitude and humility. "I didn't start out to change anything. I just wanted to help one family, to be there in a moment when they needed someone. But what I learned is that kindness doesn't end with a single act. It grows, it spreads, and it brings people together. All of you, every volunteer, every parent, every young person who's come through these doors, you are proof of that." The crowd was silent, absorbing his words. Then, as if on cue, applause erupted once more, filling the air with a warmth that wrapped around them all. After the speeches, the event moved into full swing. The new community center was bustling with life. Inside, Daniel watched as people explored the renovated rooms. Young children browsing through the library's books, parents signing up for workshops, and teens gathering in the new art and music rooms. The center's new design reflected Daniel's belief in holistic support, with resources that addressed not only basic needs, but also the potential and passions of each individual. Daniel wandered through the building, admiring the work that had gone into every detail. In one room, a mentorship program was underway, led by a group of local veterans who had joined Daniel in his mission to serve. They spoke to young people about resilience, sharing stories of their own battles with adversity. Daniel listened from the doorway, moved by the camaraderie that had blossomed among the veterans, many of whom had once felt as lost as he had upon returning home. "Daniel," a familiar voice called out, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see Linda, the director of the center, approaching him with a proud smile. She had been his first ally, the one who had opened the doors to this journey, and she was now his closest friend and confidant. Together, they had seen the center grow from a small gathering space to a beacon of hope for countless families. "This is incredible, Daniel," Linda said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Look at what you've built." He shook his head humbly. "We built this, Linda. All of us. I just happened to be the one who saw it first." Linda chuckled. "And look where that vision has taken us. You've turned this community into something extraordinary. You've shown people what's possible when we lift each other up." They stood together in silence, watching as families moved through the halls, laughter and conversation filling the air. Daniel felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling he hadn't known in years. He had found his purpose here, not in grand gestures or accolades, but in the quiet impact of compassion, the steady work of making lives better. Later that afternoon, Daniel gathered with the Clarks and a few close friends for a quiet moment outside. They stood in the center's garden, a small, peaceful space filled with wildflowers and benches. The garden had been Leo's idea, a place where people could come to reflect, to find solace, or to simply sit and breathe. As they stood together, Brandon turned to Daniel, his voice filled with gratitude. "Mr. Daniel," he began, his tone serious, "I don't know if I ever told you, but you saved us. You didn't just help us get by. You showed us a different way to live." Daniel's throat tightened as he looked at the young man Brandon had become. "I didn't save you, Brandon. You saved yourselves. You and your family. You found your strength and chose to believe in something better. I just helped you see it." Mrs. Clark nodded, her face soft with gratitude. "No matter what, we'll never forget what you've done for us. You gave us a future, and we're going to make sure that future is bright." Leo chimed in, his voice filled with determination. "I'm going to be like you, Mr. Daniel. I want to help people too, the way you helped us." Daniel smiled, a deep pride filling his heart. "Then you'll be someone who makes a difference, Leo. And remember, it's not about big acts. It's about showing up, about being there for people in those small, quiet moments. That's where change happens." They stood together for a while, the silence filled with a profound sense of connection. In those moments, Daniel felt the true weight of his journey. The people he had helped, the lives he had touched, and the legacy of compassion he would leave behind. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over Willow Creek, Daniel took one last walk through the center. He paused in the hallway, taking in the photographs on the wall, snapshots of the families, volunteers, and mentors who had made the center what it was. His own face was there too, in a candid photo of him laughing with Brandon and Leo, a moment of joy frozen in time. In that hallway, he was joined by Jalen, now a young man pursuing his dream of social work. Jalen had come a long way from the troubled teenager Daniel had first met, and his transformation filled Daniel with hope for the future. "You know, Mr. Hayes," Jalen said, looking at the photo, "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. You showed me that I could be something more, that I didn't have to be defined by my past." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder, pride shining in his eyes. "You're the one who chose to change, Jalen. You saw your potential, and you went after it. That's all you." As they stood together, Jalen turned to him, his voice soft but resolute. "I'm going to keep doing this work, Mr. Hayes. I want to help people, just like you helped me. I want to be that light for someone else." Daniel nodded, his heart full. "Then you're going to do amazing things, Jalen. And remember, you're not alone. None of us are." With those words, Daniel knew that his work had come full circle. He had built something lasting, something that would continue to grow long after he was gone. The community he had helped create, the lives he had touched, and the hope he had nurtured would live on in each person he had inspired. As he stepped outside, the night sky stretched above him, vast and infinite, filled with stars that shone like beacons of light. Daniel looked up, feeling a quiet joy settle within him, a peace that filled every corner of his soul. He had found his place, his purpose, and he knew that the legacy he had built would carry forward, a testament to the power of compassion, kindness, and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. And with that, he walked into the night, knowing that he had made a difference, not just in one family's life, but in the world around him. His story, once filled with struggle and loss, had become a story of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of a single act of kindness.